Hello everyone. So I've been getting a lot of questions on my build for Sprinter. So a monk is going to be very different than a demon hunter and a wizard. The other classes really don't run Sprinter very effectively, but since the monk is just so darn good, I focus on the monk whenever I do want to run Sprinter in season. So at the very start of the season, you're going to look for a couple of sets of very basic gear, just so that you can get your dashing strike to be somewhat useful. This is stuff that you would use the day one of a brand new season to try and get on the leaderboards, and I use something similar to this to get on the leaderboards myself. So very quickly, what the build does in general is you use Dashing Strike with the Radiance rune to turn it into fire, and you run around. Actually, you don't run. You dash around everywhere to go through walls, go over borders and boundaries, and teleport and warp all around. Um, and it's just a really fun build once you can kind of get used to the ridiculous speed that it can put out. But everything is involving getting your dashing strike either more damage or assisting its utility in some way. I have three different versions of this build. So the first one is what you'll be using on the leaderboards to get Sprinter as one of the first people in the season. Number two is what you'll use mid-season as you kind of get better gear. And then number three is kind of the optimal setup for what a endgame Sprinter build looks like if you're really trying for close to world records. So number one is you want to have the 4-piece raiment. What this does, it allows Dashing Strike to no longer have a cooldown, but instead now it costs Spirit. And then if you physically run out of Spirit, then you use one of the charges, and then you gotta wait for it to recharge before you can use it again. With this, at the very start of the season, you'll want the 4-piece, you want shoulders and hands, and you want the head and the torso. Because you can do challenge rifts right at the start of the season. When you do a challenge rift, you get about 15 of each of the bounty mats, and you'll be using some of those bounty mats to craft 3 pieces of Captain Crimson's. You'll want the waist, the legs, and the boots. That 3-piece will give you 20% CDR, 20% RCR, and it'll increase your damage dealt by a portion of your CDR. So this is kind of the basic of the build, and you want to try and hope for a couple of pieces very early on. It doesn't really, there's not really anything that's mandatory. There were some things that I even messed up on during my Sprinter build to get number 9 this season. So don't even worry if it's not the most perfect setup. One of the items you're going to try and aim for is Jawbreaker. This allows you to constantly refund Dashing Strike, so you'll get Spirit back whenever you hit an enemy that's far away. In many areas, you're running through enemies, so this makes it so the Dashing Strike is nearly free most of the time. Um, and then another one that's just a very perfect item overall, and you're really going to try and hope for this item, is Obsidian Ring. It has resource reduction, cooldown reduction, and attack speed, all of which improve Dashing Strike. And then you want to re-roll the crit chance into a socket. Now, why roll a crit chance? Don't you need the damage? That's where other items will come into play for more damage. Since crit is unreliable, we don't want to rely on something that can be random. So, in this case, we'll re-roll the crit chance to socket. And then for cubes, pretty much anything goes for your weapon. If you happen to get like Echoing Fury to increase your attack speed or Flying Dragon to increase your attack speed, great, you can use that. If you get Flesh Rake, you can increase the damage of your Dashing Strike. That's fantastic, and it's in one of the later builds. Um, there's a few others. Messerschmitt's Reaver. You can sometimes get additional cooldowns when you're in the fray. Ingeom might even be a little bit useful early on if you can find an elite pack and you're out of spirit. Just hit the elite pack and suddenly you got infinite spirit for a few seconds. And there are some other ones. I just have Furnace here. It's somewhat common for most builds and increases damage against elites, which also includes bosses. So those are all decent weapons. It's not really necessary to really get a weapon slot. But if you do a challenge drift, you'll have a couple of extra bounty mats. You might as well throw something in the cube. Now, the reason why I'm not including Burst of Wrath here, even though it's in all the other builds, is this is a bounty-only item, which means if you're trying to get on leaderboards, you're not going to spend 2 hours running bounties to try and get Burst of Wrath. So you're just going to pick whatever you can up off the ground, and you're not going to do bounties. So this comes in later. Similarly, when we come to your armor slot, I do not have Pride's Fall here because, again, it's a bounty item. You're probably not going to run bounties if you're going for the leaderboards. So a good alternative, you're going to try and hope for Cinder Coat. This is just about best in slot, and there's really nothing that beats it. If you can't get a Cinder Coat, some other decent alternatives. Do not use Hexing Pants. You're mostly stationary. Dashing Strike is considered an attack and not considered a movement ability. Therefore, Hexing Pants will lower your resource regeneration. So don't use Hexing Pants. On the other hand, the Wizard and the Demon Hunter might want to go for this since they have movement-based builds. Krem's Belt is decent. Because you won't have infinite dashing strike, you won't be able to just hold the button indefinitely, you will be running a lot. This gives you more move speed that goes over the cap of 25%, so this actually can give you up to 50%. 25 from Paragons, 25 from Krem's Belt. So it ends up being a decent item if you're doing a lot of just regular running. Leoric's Crown is another very good one. It depending on what kind of gem you can get early in the season, it can double that effectiveness. So if you have like a flawless royal for 12.5%, great, that doubles it to 25. But if you can only get maybe a royal or something less than that, Leoric's is still very good. So it's still another one of the top tier, and along with Cindercoat for your armor slot. I don't think there's anything else I remember seeing. Yeah, Crudest Boots gets a mention here. I have it here. I'm going to show it in the third build. But it does double your Mystic Ally, so you get an additional 4 per second, and you get an additional 100 per active. So you get 200 instead of 100, and then you get 8 instead of 4. So Crudest Boots gives you a little bit of passive and active regen in your starting build. But again, try and aim for Cindercoat, and Leoric's is a good secondary. And then for ring, just jewelry, because it also is neck, anything goes here. If you happen to grab Convention of Elements, it's random. You might still find it useful. Once in a while, you'll hit it right as you're attacking a boss. Again, I don't recommend Avarice Band, and I don't recommend Ring of Royal Grandeur at this stage because you probably won't run any bounties if you're aiming for the leaderboard. Another great one is Squirt's Necklace. If you can get that, great. Doubles your damage, and it's consistent as opposed to Convention of Elements, which is inconsistent. So that's kind of your overall build for the very start of the season. Grab, otherwise, if you don't have these cubes, or you do have these cubes but you have other items, grab whatever neck you can, whatever ring you can, whatever wrists you can, and whatever secondary weapon. So if you get like an ancient weapon that has a lot of high damage or something, wear that to increase your damage. This is, again, very early in the season, something that you want to try and hit the leaderboards with. So, after hitting your first initial level, right, and we don't even use a potion, and then let me talk about the abilities, because you probably won't even find a potion by the time you hit the leaderboards. So for abilities, obviously the main thing is Dashing Strike with the Radiance rune to make it fire, and the entire point of making it fire is to abuse Cindercoat, reduces resource cost of fire skills by 30%. So if you don't have Cindercoat, you can use just about anything else. Maybe Quicksilver, so you can get an additional Dashing Strike. Movement speed, if you're starting to really run out of Spirit, this might help you just run around for a little bit while you recover Spirit. But try and aim for Cindercoat and go for Radiance. And then other than that, you just want things to improve resource generation, such as the passive Exalted Soul, increases maximum Spirit by 50 and Spirit Regen by 4. Chant of Resonance, so when you have a mantra, you gain an additional 4 Spirit per second. and Mantra of Healing with the Circular Breathing, which regenerates 3 spirit per second. So between that and the passive, that's 7 per second. Beacon of Etar, which reduces cooldowns by 20%. And then Air Ally, which gives you 4 spirit per second, and then whenever you press the button, it gives you 100 spirit instantly. Lastly, we rounded out with Epiphany. It is on a very long cooldown. If you can get up to 75% CDR, then this is infinitely up. But you won't be able to hit that early in the season, so there are ways around it, such as Obsidian Ring. This will reduce your cooldowns every time you do something. It might hit Epiphany, as long as you're not always having Mystic Ally on cooldown, then you can guarantee that Obsidian Ring will always hit Epiphany. And then I'll be kind of your best bet. And you give it the Insight Rune to give it 45 spirit per second. And then lastly, since it's early in the season, you won't be able to hold Dashing Strike indefinitely. Use the Fleet-Footed passive. It increases your move speed by 10%. And if you notice, since the move speed cap is 25, but we have 35, Fleet-Foot is affecting movement speed beyond the normal cap. So this way you can actually run around a little bit faster for those times you inevitably will run out of spirit. So level 2 is where I've been for a long time this season. This is where now you have a lot of good items, and you really want to start rushing this mode, but you don't have best in slot items, so you want to kind of mess around with your build. Once again, potion doesn't really matter for just about anything, but here is where you're going to start using bounty items, and notice I have all 3 bounty items. So the main build is you're still using 4-piece raiment, and you're still using 3-piece Captain Crimsons, but now you reduce them to 2-piece and 3-piece because you want Ring of Royal Grandeur. So this allows you to save on 2 slots among all of these. And what I would recommend is you will need Pride's Fall, and you will need Cindercoat. So then your last item can be any of the... There's a lot of options available. What I found that's useful for me was Kyoshiro's Soul, which allows me to start using Sweeping Winds. So now when I use Sweeping Winds, it just continuously gets stacks. And then when I have at least 3 stacks, I gain 8 spirit per second. So it's just another form of passive spirit regen. But what it also does is giving me 13 stacks of Sweeping Wind with Vengeful Wind. And then this increases Sweeping Wind damage by 111%. So it doubles the damage. And then Vengeful Wind further increases the Sweeping Winds damage by about 7 to 9 times what it normally is. So if you throw about 8 times damage plus double damage or then times 13, you're getting close to 200x damage. And that makes Sweeping Wind your primary damage dealer, opposing Dashing Strike. So this makes the build much less damage oriented. You can start going crazy on skipping Dexterity. I don't know if I have any pieces that skimped on Dexterity. Usually I skimp on Vitality. I don't think I have any. But you can skimp on Dexterity to now go for CDR, RCR, attack speed, and anything else you need. That makes it so you no longer have to care about damage. So that's what Vengeful Wind and Kyoshiro's Soul allow you to do. And then it just, of course, doubles up as 8 spirit regen per second. For your jewelry slots, you have 4 slots, but you only really need 2 items. You need Obsidian Ring. I'd recommend wearing it because it has all 4 perfect stats: attack speed, RCR, CDR, and socket. And then you want to wear other stuff that has good stuff, good slots. So I had a ring that I found, Avarice Band. It had 7 CDR, 5 RCR, and an open socket. So I used that because it was really good. And then I had a Flavor of Time that had 7 CDR, 7 RCR, and open socket. So I used that. Just because the passives on the jewelry aren't really that good. You need Obsidian Ring, you need Royal Ring of Grandeur. There's nothing really else. In the third build, we will be optimizing, and then you will need to have very specific things. So For now, just get more CDR and RCR. And so let's talk about the weapons. Jawbreaker is still going to be mandatory. You need that additional ability to refund your dashing strikes. Um, and then for weapons, here's where you've got a lot of options in the mid-game. You can use Echoing Fury. It's only when slaying enemies, but you do get a lot of attack speed. You could use Flying Dragon. If you specifically lower your attack speed and you rely on Flying Dragon to always double your attack speed, this is actually a very effective item. The problem is if you start getting too much attack speed on too many pieces of gear, Flying Dragon runs into the issue where we start optimizing for the third build. And Flying Dragon will actually slightly lower your effective speed because it drains resources faster without giving you the bonus movement with Dashing Strike. So use Flying Dragon with caution. Again, try and use it with low attack speed, so this way Flying Dragon doubling it makes it very effective. But for what I've been doing, I've been using Burst of Wrath. Burst of Wrath is very good for just overall resource regeneration. You want to combine it with Wreath of Lightning so that whenever you run around, you start to destroy everything nearby, and Burst of Wrath loves that. And then, just because I had Avarice, I was using Boon of the Hoarder. It's not really necessary. The monk doesn't need to move around. Once you have infinite Dashing Strike, you're not moving at all. You're just attacking with Dashing Strike. So, Boon of the Hoarder is worthless. Avarice Band is worthless. There is something where, I think it's Reaper's Wraps, where if you pick up a health globe, it restores primary resource, but it's ineffective. You're not going to be picking up globes very much. So I wouldn't worry about that too much in terms of, well, I need Avarice, I need Boon of the Hoarder, I need to get my pickup radius so that I can proc Reaper's Wraps. It's not really necessary. So I just ended up using Vorzetchen Arm Guards. Just because I've used it in all my past builds, it's just a staple for me. Really, you can use anything in the wrist slot. It's not really good in general. And then again, jewelry, not much to see here. Weapons, you want Vengeful Wind and Jawbreaker, and then I use Burst of Wrath. That's about it for the second build. Right, I forgot gems. So in the first build, you'll probably want a topaz in your head for the the RCR. But for the second build, you might want to swap over to a diamond for the CDR, which might be more effective. You could still use a topaz all the way around, since the less frequently you have to use abilities, the less need for CDR there is. So just try and balance them. So why not things like, in your weapon slot, why not use Ingeam? For your armor slots, why not use Gloves of Worship? And then why not Flavor of Time? Well, Flavor of Time's obvious. There are no pylons in Sprinter. But Gloves of Worship, you're really not hitting any shrines at all. So even if you do get Frenzy, or you get the other one that reduces your cooldowns and increases your regen, Empowerment Shrine, I think, you don't really hit shrines. And even if you do hit a shrine, what's the odds that it's one that you need, and what's the odds it's not going to mess you up further? So Gloves of Worship is not really useful because it's ineffective most of the time. In Geom, same thing. You're not really killing elites, so you don't really need the cooldowns. And the issues that you have with Spirit all come from areas of droughts where there are no enemies, so Ingeam isn't going to help you at those points either. Messerschmitt's Reaver, same thing. You're not killing enemies. Don't worry about it. So I think there's one or two things I'm forgetting with this build. So let me quickly look it back up. And yes, abilities. We haven't gone over abilities. So now, since we are no longer just running around without Spirit, we can drop Fleet-footed, but we do want more attack speed. And because in this build I'm not using Flying Dragon, to double my attack speed, I'm not using Echoing Fury to increase my attack speed whenever I kill an enemy. I end up using Seize the Initiative, so whenever I deal damage to an enemy, it increases my attack speed by 30%. This is consistent wherever I am hitting enemies and killing enemies, then Burst of Wrath is activating, which gives me more spirit. So while I'm killing enemies, I'm moving faster, or sorry, I'm attacking faster, and I'm also generating resource faster. So it kind of counterbalances to say, well, in periods of drought, I'll be moving and attacking less frequently, which means I won't need as much spirit. I think that's it for the changes, and that's right, of course, I use Sweeping Wind with Inner Storm Rune. Everything else is the same as the first build. But now let's get into the third build, which is the optimized late game build. And this one I am right on the cusp of being able to do it successfully, so I think I'm going to try running with this through the rest of the season. What we want to try and do is further optimize our slots. There are some items like Holy Beacon, which even though it's an amulet has Spirit Regen as one of the roles. So you could get a quad roll of attack speed, resource reduction, cooldown reduction, and gem slot. But at some point attack speed becomes counterproductive. You start to attack so fast that you actually hit an issue, and I'll discuss that issue in just a moment here. So lower your attack speed, don't get the attack speed, just get Spirit Regen on your neck. And then for your 2 rings, you're going to want, of course, your Obsidian Ring, and you're going to need to wear a Ring of Royal Grandeur. You're going to want attack speed, RCR, CDR, and socket. I don't have it yet, so I'm going to have to struggle along. And then you will want Squirt's Necklace in the cube because you're using the Holy Beacon for the 3 Spirit Regen per second. That gets rid of your neck slot, and you will want that. So this actually does use 3 pieces. It requires the Squirts, and then it requires the Holy Beacon, but that doesn't have a passive. So that ends up costing a lot of perfection in your build. You need to have the right items and the right rolls. So since I don't have a Ring of Royal Grandeur that has the right rolls, I'm still leery about the build. We can try it though. But with this, you're actually going to swap over to the gem, Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. What that does is if you don't take damage for 4 seconds, it gives you an Absorb Shield. What that does is it allows you to keep Pride's Fall active all the time. It allows you to return to town very effectively, even if there's a lot of enemies attacking you because you're not taking damage. The downside is you lose Sweeping Winds. You lose that 200 times multiplier in Sweeping Winds. So we have to round it out by grabbing Flesh Rake and make Dashing Strike our primary damaging ability. So this is the best one I could find so far this season. RCR, CDR, Spirit Regen, and then 95% passive. It can roll up to 100% passive. And of course it can roll up to 3 Spirit Regen per second. Likewise, Jawbreaker, you can do the same thing. RCR, CDR, Spirit Regen, and Socket. Sockets, you want to use Ramaladni's, and then you'll also want to have Ancients, because now damage starts coming into play. When it takes you 7 to 8 dashing strikes to kill a boss, getting Ancients, getting Primals to reduce it to 4 to 5 hits saves you time on boss fights, and that amounts to a lot when you have to kill about 20 bosses, 30 bosses per run. Bosses and elites. So, lastly, if I could get attack speed on my weapons, I would. And that's also why we are now using Lakuni Prowlers. We want more attack speed, as much as possible passive. So this can roll up to 7%, but I didn't get a good roll, so I still need better Lakunis. And I think the rest is about the same. Except now for the head slot, we want both Pride's Fall and the Laws of Seth. And we're going to add the last ability to our bar, Blinding Flash, which has a 15-second cooldown. And when you're talking about you've got close to 70-75% cooldown reduction, this is only like a 4 or 5 second cooldown. And every 4 to 5 seconds, gaining 150 plus spirit is absolutely massive and completely makes it so that you physically cannot run out of spirit unless you're not paying attention. So why not use Flying Dragon in that case? If you have infinite spirit, go fast, and Flying Dragon makes it so that you go faster. It's the reason why instead of Flying Dragon I'm using Burst of Wrath to have a little bit more resource regen. It's why I'm not using Echoing Fury. And it's why I actually switched my passives from Seize the Initiative, which gives me more attack speed, over to Momentum for a little bit more damage. And the reason why is the camera scroll speed actually hits a cap. When you start to go too fast, then the camera can only catch up with you so much. And when you're dashing striking, it goes to where your mouse is. And so your mouse can only go as fast as your screen is moving. And so if you notice here, when I'm moving around, I'm doing pretty good dashes between, pretty good speed and distance between all of my dashes. But once I quit Flying Dragon, if you notice, at some point, I'm going to start going super fast, which, there we go. And now notice that my dashes are much, much smaller. There's much less distance covered per dash. So because of that, Flying Dragon actually is ineffective because it increases your spirit cost without increasing your physical travel speed. So that's why I don't recommend anymore Echoing Fury, Flying Dragon, anything along that lines of attack speed. It's physically the camera's limitation. So instead we go over to Burst of Wrath. So Burst of Wrath just gives me a little more spirit regen, just so I don't have to use abilities quite as often. And of course, since we lost Sweeping Wind, we have to turn Dashing Strike into our primary attack. So using Flesh Rake assists with that matter. Getting Primals or Ancients, trying to sanctify an item in Season 27 works. And then anywhere you can get more Dashing Strike damage, like I was able to get it on the chest piece. And I think Shoulders also allows it, but I don't have a good enough Shoulders to get Dashing Strike. Likewise, I don't have a good enough Gloves to get attack speed RCR CDR, so that's another improvement I can make. So this build is still coming along, but physically you want to get to some point where you have enough attack speed that you can get as fast as possible, but then nothing that will make it so that you start expending more dashing strikes than your screen can physically move, and that becomes the upper limitation of how fast Sprinter can physically be run. So in all these builds, you do want to use Gogok of Swiftness, which gives you 15% CDR. In most of the builds, you want to use Wreath of Lightning, so that occasionally it'll just start exploding things, which potentially gives you resource if you have Burst of Wrath. And then early on, you might want to use Boon of the Hoarder with Avarice to give you more move speed as you walk around. As you get more efficient with your cooldowns, and you no longer need to run around, you can switch out Boon of the Hoarder for Molten Wildebeest Gizzard, which now gives you an Absorb Shield. This way you can keep up Pride's Fall longer. And so that is the crux of the build, so that at level 3 you now have all 6 abilities on your bar, and everything pretty much has a spot. Then potion, there's really no good potion for this build. You could use the teleport one for some randomness. I think Epiphany prevents you from getting CC'd, so if not, then when you're not having Epiphany up, this helps by giving you immunity. And then with Molten Wildebeest Gizzard, it's based on your life per second, so in some of these I have given myself extra regen life, just so that I have a bigger absorb shield, and then on other pieces I have re-rolled for armor. I don't remember which pieces I rolled for armor. I rolled for regen life here, but you can roll for armor or all resist to make your shield more effective. And of course, more paragons just mean, or more gem levels just means more regen life. So that's the build in all of its glory, and of course, most of this is not necessary unless you're going for maximal runs. In this case, my record's about 43 minutes, world record is under 40 minutes, and of course 4-man record is much lower at like 34 minutes, but I talk about solo runs and just run it that way. So that's my build. Take it for what it is. I do want to mention one thing real fast about Demon Hunters and Wizards. Wizards, it is based on attack speed since you're trying to use Teleport Wormhole as fast as possible, and then cooldown reduction to get your teleports up as fast as possible. So you want to focus on attack speed for a wizard. But Demon Hunters, Vault is considered a movement ability. So Demon Hunters do have Boon of the Hoarders mandatory, Avarice Band is mandatory, or Avarice Band is mandatory, so you will constantly be killing things, you'll be increasing your pickup radius, and then you'll constantly be collecting gold, which increases your move speed. You'll use things like Vault Displacement, and things of that nature to increase move speed. Hot Pursuit is a passive, I know. I ran Demon Hunter a few seasons, so I know it was tight, but I was able to consistently get it to like 57 minutes or so. Now I rolled a monk, and I'm looking at 46 to 47 minutes every run, so I'm never going to go back to a Demon Hunter. So that's it. Demon Hunters want move speed, wizards and monks want attack speed to do all of their stuff. So in the next video, I am going to go through the entire game of Sprinter solo without a follower, because there's no reason to have a follower. They don't really add much. I think they give you some CDR in some cases, like extra crit chance. I think the Enchantress might give you, CDR, and I think the Templar gives you resource regeneration, somewhere in there. Yeah, resource regeneration. So you can use a follower, but I won't be, since I usually run in a group of carrying 3 other people. And so you can't have a follower when in a group of real-life people. So that's the build. Good luck with your runs, and I'll see you out there.